How exactly does a mid-level analyst end up leading a separatist ICE colony, recognized by 3 European micronations, all because of one deeply unfortunate photograph of executive grooming? The answer begins with a meme so heavily saturated it could melt pixels, comparing the chief executive's fresh haircut to a discarded kitchen sponge. And the exact moment my thumb hovered over the reply all button on the company-wide email list, before gravity and poor judgment sent it straight into the corporate ecosystem like a digital grenade. Within 11 minutes, 473 employees had opened the attachment. The chief executive had forwarded it to legal with the subject line, "Immediate action required," and HR had already printed a copy, circled it in red ink with the fury of a disappointed parent, and scheduled a disciplinary meeting for 9 o'clock the following morning with the ominous phrase, "Attendance mandatory," bolded twice. The email from HR arrived at 6:47 in the evening, which meant I had exactly 14 hours to either craft a defense that could survive corporate scrutiny or find a way to make the problem disappear entirely. And since I possessed neither the charisma for the former nor the technical skills for the latter, I did what any desperate analyst would do and decided to tamper with the office thermostat. The Western Wing climate control panel sat behind a flimsy plastic cover in the third-floor utility closet, protected only by a single Phillips head screw and the assumption that nobody would be stupid enough to weaponize temperature. And by 7:30 that evening, I had cranked the dial down to 15 degrees Celsius, which is 59 degrees Fahrenheit for anyone keeping score. Cold enough to make sitting still uncomfortable, but not quite cold enough to trigger an emergency maintenance call. My thinking, if you could call it that, was simple. If everyone in the disciplinary meeting spent the entire time shivering and distracted, maybe they would rush through the proceedings and settle for a written warning instead of termination, which in hindsight reveals exactly the kind of flawed logic that got me into this situation in the first place. By 8:15 the next morning, the Western Wing had transformed into a walk-in refrigerator. The kind of chill that makes your fingers stiff and your breath visible. And instead of scaring off my co-workers, it somehow attracted them like moths to a cold, bright flame. 3 accountants from the Eastern Wing wandered over first, drawn by rumors of the temperature drop, and instead of complaining, they pulled up chairs and started openly griping about their quarterly audits, the soul-crushing deadline pressure, and the fact that the frozen air somehow made their misery feel more real and therefore easier to share. Within 20 minutes, 2 more analysts had joined, then a project coordinator, then a marketing associate who brought a space heater that immediately tripped a circuit breaker and plunged half the hallway into darkness, which only made the gathering feel more like a bunker and less like a workplace. And suddenly, I was not just avoiding a disciplinary meeting, but accidentally hosting a full-scale freezing gripe session with myself as the unelected leader. HR noticed the crowd at 8:53, exactly 7 minutes before my scheduled execution, and the director herself marched down the hallway with a compliance officer in tow, her breath fogging the glass door as she pounded on it and demanded immediate dispersal of what she called an unauthorized gathering in violation of workplace conduct standards. The accountants did not move, partly out of solidarity and partly because their joints had gone stiff from the cold. And when I tried to explain that this was all a misunderstanding caused by a broken thermostat, the compliance officer pointed to the utility closet where the plastic cover now hung at a crooked angle, the screw sitting in plain view on the floor like a confession, and informed me that tampering with building systems was a terminable offence under Section 12 of the Employee Handbook. This was the moment I should have apologised, accepted whatever punishment was coming, and moved on with my life. But panic does strange things to judgment. And instead I said the 6 words that would define the next 72 hours. "This zone belongs to us now." The accountants laughed first, a nervous chuckle that rippled through the group, and then someone, I think it was the project coordinator, said, "Yeah, the chill zone is ours." And suddenly the joke had momentum, the kind of absurd energy that turns a bad idea into a movement. I grabbed a piece of printer paper, scribbled "Independent Territory, no H or beyond this point" in blue ballpoint pen and stuck it into the soil of a dying potted plant near the doorway like a flag. And the group actually cheered, which felt incredible for exactly 4 seconds until the HR director pulled out her phone and started recording. She did not yell or threaten, just held the camera steady and said in a voice like freezer-burned steel that this footage would be forwarded to executive leadership and corporate legal, effective immediately. And then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking down the hallway in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown timer. By 10:30, corporate legal had sent a cease and desist letter via internal email, demanding the immediate removal of all unauthorized signage, the restoration of climate control to standard parameters, and a formal written apology to be submitted within 2 hours. And when I did not respond because I was too busy trying to convince the accountants that maybe we should all just go back to our desks, they escalated by locking the break room fridge remotely and shutting off the coffee machine, which in any other office might have broken morale, but in our frozen bunker only strengthened resolve. Someone suggested we draft a formal Declaration of Independence as a joke to diffuse the tension. So I wrote 3 paragraphs on the back of a quarterly revenue report, citing grievances like insufficient snack variety and mandatory fun events, and printed 5 copies on company letterhead because the absurdity felt like armor. But when I slid one under the HR director's door, she did not laugh. She forwarded it to an employee relations mediator with the subject line, "Hostile work environment. Immediate intervention required." The mediator arrived at 1:15 in the afternoon, a middle-aged woman in a gray blazer, carrying a tray of tepid coffee and a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. And she set the coffee tray on a filing cabinet just outside our perimeter, a peace offering that nobody touched because we all understood it was a trap. She asked in the kind of calm, measured tone you use with hostage takers whether we would be willing to discuss our concerns in a structured mediation session. And I wanted to say yes, to end this nightmare before it got worse. But the accountants were watching, and the project coordinator had already started live tweeting the standoff. And backing down now would mean admitting that the entire rebellion was pointless, which it obviously was, but admitting it out loud felt impossible. The mediator tried for 40 minutes, rotating between empathy, reason, and thinly veiled warnings about career consequences. And when none of that worked, she pulled out her phone and made a call to someone she referred to only as escalation management, which sounded ominous enough to make 2 of the analysts quietly slip out the back hallway and return to their desks. The rest of us held firm, mostly because leaving now would mean walking past the HR director who had set up a folding chair directly outside the door like a sentry, and also because the project coordinator had convinced everyone that we were making history and that corporate tyranny ends here, which in the moment felt inspiring, but in retrospect was the kind of rhetoric that gets people fired. By 3 o'clock, the mediator had given up on dialogue and switched to documentation, photographing our makeshift flag, the thermostat setting, and the crude Declaration of Independence. And when she asked for my employee identification number, I gave it to her, because at that point, lying seemed worse than compliance, which tells you everything about how thoroughly I had lost control of the situation. At 4:30, the mediator returned with a representative from facilities management, who bypassed our blockade entirely by entering through the utility closet, resetting the thermostat to a comfortable 22 degrees Celsius, and then locking the panel behind a steel cover that required a key we obviously did not have. The temperature climbed slowly, degree by degree, and as the chill faded, so did the group's commitment to the cause, because it turns out that rebellion fueled by discomfort evaporates the moment comfort returns. And by 5:15, the only people left were me, one accountant who had fallen asleep in his chair, and the project coordinator who was still typing furiously on her phone. The HR director appeared in the doorway, no longer angry, just tired, and she informed me that my desk had been reclassified as a supervised workspace pending the outcome of a formal investigation, that all building access privileges were suspended effective immediately, and that I was required to attend a mandatory reintegration seminar the following Monday, which sounded less like discipline and more like corporate re-education. The fallout spread faster than the original meme because someone, probably the project coordinator, had sent screenshots of the declaration to a workplace gossip forum. And by Tuesday morning, 3 separate employment law blogs had written op-eds about thermostat activism, 2 of which used my situation as a cautionary tale, and 1 of which called me a hero of the working class. Which would have been flattering if it had not also included my full name and LinkedIn profile. The chief executive never responded directly, but the following week, the company announced a new policy requiring biometric authentication for all climate control adjustments, which everyone understood was aimed directly at me. And the compliance officer added a section to the employee handbook titled Unauthorized Territorial Claims and Building Systems Abuse that was so specific it might as well have included my photograph. The mediator submitted a 19-page report that I was allowed to read but not keep, and the only sentence I remember clearly stated that the respondent demonstrated a pattern of escalating defiance rooted in an initial failure to accept accountability, which was technically accurate but also felt deeply unfair given that the whole disaster started with a haircut meme. I kept my job, barely, under conditions that included a 6-month probationary period, mandatory anger management training that I did not need, and a permanent note in my personnel file describing the incident as a lapse in professional judgment involving infrastructure and insubordination, which is the kind of phrase that follows you through every performance review for the rest of your career. The accountants who joined the standoff received written warnings, the project coordinator was transferred to a different department, and the potted plant that held our flag died 2 weeks later, which felt symbolic in a way that was almost too perfect. The thermostat in the Western Wing now sits behind a locked steel panel with a security camera pointed directly at it, a monument to one analyst's catastrophic inability to just apologize and move on. And every time I walk past it, I feel the same cold dread I felt when the HR director started recording. The knowledge that a single stupid decision can reshape your entire professional existence if you let pride and panic make your choices for you. So here is the question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If you were staring down a disciplinary meeting and had access to the office thermostat, would you crank it down and risk everything? Or would you walk in, take your punishment, and live to fight another day? Drop your strategy in the comments, and if you have ever done something this monumentally dumb at work, share the story, because misery loves company. And hey, hit that like button right now, just in case the algorithm decides to show mercy where HR would not.